Loner rancher opened the blanket and stumbled back in horror. A girl said, "Just kill me fast." The wind carried dust across the barren Texas plain, curling into the cracks of an abandoned ranch house where no man had dwelt for years. Ethan Cole pushed open the warped door, the wood groaning as though it resented his return to civilization. He had been riding for 3 days without rest, his horse gaunt, his body heavier with each mile of memories he wished he could bury. All he sought was water, shelter, a place to lay down the ghosts that had followed him since the war. But when he pulled back the moth-eaten blanket lying in the corner of the cabin, he stumbled backward in horror. A girl, no older than 16, lay bruised and battered beneath it. Her lips trembled as she forced words through cracked breath. "Just kill me fast." Ethan froze. The revolver at his hip suddenly felt like a curse. For a long moment, the only sound was the rasp of the girl's breathing and the restless stamping of his horse outside. He dropped to one knee, shaking his head. "No, child, no." Her swollen eyes blinked open, filled with terror, then disbelief. It was not death she wanted. It was an end to the pain inflicted by men without mercy. Ethan carefully pulled his canteen free, lifting it to her lips. She drank greedily, coughing, tears mixing with dust on her cheeks. He asked no questions yet. He knew the answers would come, and they would not be gentle. The girl's name was Sofia. She whispered of Diego Vargas's gang, outlaws who had stormed through the valley, burning, taking, leaving ruin behind. Her family gone, she had crawled to this shack to die unseen. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty before, during the war and in the hollow years after. But there was something different here, something that pierced deeper. The outlaws were not faceless enemies of a distant battlefield. They were men who preyed upon the innocent, the unarmed, the faithful. He wrapped the blanket back around Sofia's shoulders and carried her outside into the fading light. Across the plain, smoke drifted upward in a thin black column. The village. The settlers had no militia, no lawmen to protect them. Only their chapel, their families, and prayers whispered beneath the wooden cross. For the first time in many months, Ethan felt a tug at his heart stronger than the weight of his grief. He had told himself he was finished with war. Yet the war had found him again, not in the uniforms of blue or gray, but in the cries of the helpless. As the girl clung to him, whispering half-conscious pleas for her mother, Ethan looked toward the rising smoke. He knew what waited there: fear, desperation, and the same gang that had shattered this child's world. He adjusted the Bible in his coat pocket, the leather worn thin, its pages smudged with the names of those he had lost. His fingers lingered over it a moment longer than habit. "Lord," he murmured beneath his breath, "if I must fight again, let it be for them." With Sofia balanced against his weary frame, Ethan swung into the saddle and turned his horse toward the village. He had no illusions about what awaited him. Violence had a way of calling him back, no matter how far he rode. But this time was different. This time it was not for glory or a cause already lost to history. It was for a girl who had asked for death, and for a village that still sang hymns in the dark. The sun dipped low, setting the desert aflame with streaks of red and gold. Ethan rode into it, grim and silent, carrying with him the first thread of a story that would bind him once more to people, to hope, and perhaps to redemption. The trail into the valley was carved by hooves and wagon wheels long since broken. Ethan rode slowly, the girl still wrapped in the tattered blanket before him, her body weight little more than a shadow against his chest. Dusk painted the horizon in weary shades of violet, and with each mile the column of smoke grew darker. The village lay in a shallow basin of mesquite and stone. From a distance, it looked almost peaceful. Rows of adobe homes, a well at the center, and a small wooden chapel that rose like a guardian's hand against the dying sky. But the closer Ethan drew, the more he saw. Doors splintered, fences torn down, families huddled together in silence. A boy darted out from behind a broken cart, a stick in his hands as if it were a rifle. He froze when he saw Ethan, his wide eyes not on the stranger, but on the frail figure he carried. The boy's voice cracked as he shouted for his mother. From the chapel steps came a woman. Her dark hair was bound loosely, her dress plain but dust-stained from work and worry. She reached Ethan with a swiftness born of fear and pulled the girl into her arms. The girl's whisper, "Madre," trembled into the woman's ear before she fainted. The woman's name was Isabella Ramirez. Her boy, the one clutching the stick, was Miguel. And the stranger who had brought them a dying child was simply another weary soul who should have ridden on. Yet Isabella's eyes, filled with both gratitude and suspicion, lingered on Ethan. She asked nothing at first, only nodded toward the chapel. Father Alonso will know what to do. Inside, the chapel was dimly lit, the scent of candle wax mingling with smoke that had drifted from the hells. Father Alonso, old yet strong, received Sofia with practiced hands, laying her gently near the altar. He whispered prayers in Spanish, his voice steady, an anchor against the chaos beyond. Ethan remained near the doorway, hat in hand, uneasy. The wooden cross above the altar seemed to watch him, asking questions he had avoided for years. The quiet was shattered by hooves outside. Men's laughter, hard, cruel, echoed into the night. Isabella stiffened, pulling Miguel close. Ethan's hand instinctively dropped toward his revolver, but Father Alonso raised his own in caution. Through the chapel's cracked shutters, Ethan saw them. Diego Vargas and his riders. There were 6 of them, dust-smeared and armed, their voices sharp with mockery. They circled the square, taunting, firing a few shots into the air. Diego himself dismounted, kicking over a barrel as if the village belonged to him. He called out in Spanish and broken English, his voice dripping with authority stolen from fear. "This land, this water, it belongs to us now. Pray all you want, Padre. Your God won't stop hunger or bullets." Isabella felt Ethan's gaze. It was the same look he had seen on battlefields. People waiting to see if a man would stand or remain a shadow. He wanted no part of it. The war had taken enough from him. But as Diego spat near the chapel door, Ethan's fingers tightened around the brim of his hat. Father Alonso stepped forward instead, calm yet unyielding. "This village belongs to God, not to thieves. Leave before the Lord's judgment falls upon you." The men laughed, firing another shot into the sky. Diego mounted again, snarling promises to return with fire and rope. Soon their hoofbeats faded, leaving the chapel in silence once more. Miguel turned to Ethan, his young face pale but defiant. "You have a gun," he whispered. "Why didn't you stop them?" Ethan's throat burned with words unsaid. Because he had promised himself never to fight again. Because he feared becoming the very thing he hated. Because mercy sometimes feels like cowardice. Instead, he placed his hat back on his head, his voice low. "Because sometimes, boy, a fight chooses you." The boy did not understand, but the priest did. Isabella did. And though none spoke of it, the villagers knew. The drifter who had carried a broken girl into their midst had been sent not by chance, but perhaps by Providence itself. Outside, the night deepened. The wind carried the last echo of Vargas's threat. And in the chapel, the candles flickered against the old wood, casting shadows that seemed to whisper of battles yet to come. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. The morning after the raid, the valley wore a silence too heavy for any village. Smoke curled lazily from the remains of burned carts, and children gathered buckets of water as if routine had returned, though fear lingered in their eyes. Ethan Cole had risen early, intent on leaving before anyone asked him to stay. His horse was saddled, the Bible tucked back into the inner pocket of his coat. Yet when he turned toward the chapel, he saw Isabella waiting by the well. Her face was drawn but steady. She carried a clay bowl covered by a cloth, and when she approached, the smell of beans and corn filled the air. "You've given more than you owed," she said quietly. "At least eat before you ride." Ethan hesitated. He had long learned that a meal could be a chain, binding a man where he did not intend to remain. But hunger won its argument. He accepted the bowl, nodding a simple thanks, and sat on the well's edge. Miguel appeared at his mother's side, clutching the same stick he had wielded like a rifle the night before. His eyes never left the revolver at Ethan's hip. "Is it true you face them without fear?" the boy asked, voice half awe, half disbelief. Ethan shook his head. "Only fools feel no fear." The boy tilted his head, unsatisfied. Ethan recognized the look, the beginning of hero worship, dangerous and fragile. He took another slow bite of beans, then leaned closer, his voice a low warning. "This," he said, tapping the revolver, "is not a badge of courage. It's a curse. Every man I've known who carried one long enough, it took something from him he couldn't get back." Miguel frowned, not understanding, but Isabella caught the weight of Ethan's words. Her gaze softened, and for the first time he saw the quiet strength that kept her standing. When the meal was done, Ethan rose, tightening the saddle straps. The road stretched west, promising anonymity. Yet the sound of children crying within the chapel pulled at him, the broken rhythm of their sobs striking chords he had tried to silence for years. He turned his face toward the horizon, but his body remained still. Inside, Father Alonso was tending to Sofia, whispering prayers as he bathed her wounds. The girl stirred, clinging to the priest's hand, and Ethan glimpsed her lips shaping the word Madre. He looked away, but not fast enough to escape the ache it stirred. He had buried his wife and son long ago, yet here was a reflection of their absence, a woman fighting to protect her boy, a child yearning for a father's strength, a priest clinging to faith when hope seemed thin as smoke. Ethan exhaled, heavy with the truth he did not wish to face. He was tied to this place now, not by chains of law or duty, but by the unspoken debt of compassion. The villagers moved quietly about, repairing fences, sweeping ashes, gathering what little could be salvaged. They did not ask him to stay. They did not need to. Their eyes told the story, pleas written in silence. As the sun climbed, Ethan set his horse back into the corral. He muttered something about resting the animal, but deep inside he knew the decision had already been made. He was not leaving, not yet. And though no man spoke it aloud, every villager knew the drifter who had stumbled into their valley was no longer just passing through. By the second evening, whispers had spread like brush fire through the village. Some claimed Diego Vargas was once a rancher whose cattle were stolen by soldiers. Others said he had fought for neither North nor South, only himself. And when the war ended, he turned his bitterness into a trade of blood. Whatever the truth, one fact was certain: he was coming back. The villagers prepared as best they could. Doors were barred, lamps dimmed, children hushed into corners. Ethan sharpened a knife more out of habit than intent. The scrape of steel against stone, a rhythm he despised but could not abandon. Then came the hoofbeats. 6 riders swept into the square, their laughter loud and reckless. They did not bring fire this time, only hunger. They stormed the well, shoving aside women who carried buckets. One man snatched a jug of water, gulped greedily, then smashed it on the stones as if to prove his power. From inside the chapel, Miguel's small voice cracked. "They're here!" His mother silenced him with a hand to his shoulder, but her eyes darted toward Ethan. He should have turned away. He had sworn it. Yet when he saw the outlaws shove an old man to the ground, rage lit a fuse that war had left burning in him for years. Ethan stepped into the square, revolver drawn but steady. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but cutting through the night. The riders stilled, then burst into laughter. One dismounted, swaggering toward him. "And who are you, old soldier? Another starving fool?" The outlaw reached for his pistol. Ethan fired first, not to kill, but to strike the gun from his hand. Sparks flew as the weapon clattered onto stone. The others shifted, their bravado faltering. Ethan's revolver never wavered. "Take what you came for," he said, "but leave them standing." The moment hung in silence, broken only by the ragged breath of villagers watching from shadow. Then Diego's voice came from the rear, calm and venomous. He had not dismounted. He sat astride his horse, dark eyes fixed on Ethan. "I know you," Vargas said, switching to English thickened by years on the border. "A soldier who lost his war. A man with nothing left but guilt." The words sank like daggers, though Ethan gave no sign. Diego leaned forward, his smile sharp. "This is not your fight, gringo. Ride on, and you'll live. Stay, and you'll bury more than bones." With a signal, the gang withdrew, their hooves pounding into the distance. But the echo of Diego's threat lingered heavier than smoke. Inside the chapel, the villagers crowded around Ethan, their eyes shining with both relief and fear. Miguel's admiration blazed unchecked, but Isabella's expression was different. Quiet thanks tempered by the weight of what it meant. Ethan holstered his weapon, jaw tight. "Don't look at me like I'm your salvation," he muttered. "I'm not staying." Yet even as he said it, he knew the lie. The villagers had tasted courage, and now they would cling to it. That night, while the children slept and the candles burned low, Father Alonso spoke to Ethan in hushed tones. "Vargas was once one of us," the priest revealed. "He lost his land after the war, his cattle taken by men wealthier and crueler than he. But instead of seeking justice, he chose revenge. Now his hatred has no end." Ethan stared at the cross above the altar, its shadow long against the wall. He felt the truth pressing in. Vargas was not simply a thief. He was a mirror of what Ethan himself might have become had he surrendered to bitterness instead of faith. And that knowledge weighed heavier than the gun at his side. That night, the chapel became the heart of the village. The pews were crowded, not with order, but with desperation. Families clutching one another, children curled against their mothers, old men kneeling stiffly, whispering prayers through trembling lips. Father Alonso lit candles along the altar until the small room glowed with a golden warmth that fought back the shadows. He raised his hands and spoke in Spanish, words Ethan could not follow, but understood all the same. The cadence of faith needed no translation. Then came the hymn. It rose slowly, one voice at first, then many, weaving together in sorrow and hope. Santo, Santo, Santo. The sound filled the chapel like a tide, carrying with it the weight of centuries, of ancestors who had sung the same words under different skies. Ethan sat at the back, hat in his lap, shoulders hunched as though bracing against a storm. He had not heard a hymn since the war, not since the night his wife's voice joined his in a church that no longer stood. Now, as the voices swelled, he felt the walls of memory closing in. His hand drifted to the Bible in his coat. He did not open it, only gripped the worn leather until his knuckles whitened. Miguel, sitting a few pews ahead, turned once to glance at him. The boy's eyes were not pleading this time. They were curious, almost testing. "Do you believe, or don't you?" the gaze seemed to ask. Ethan looked away. The hymn ended, leaving a hush broken only by the rasp of wind outside. Father Alonso stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Fear not. The Lord does not abandon his children, but he does not fight in our stead. We must act with courage as one body." A murmur rippled through the villagers. Some nodded, others bowed their heads deeper. Isabella placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder, guiding him back into stillness. Near the altar, Sofia stirred. The girl's eyes fluttered open, shadowed by fever but sharp with memory. Her whisper was faint, yet every ear strained toward it. They are not finished." She coughed, and Isabella rushed to her side with water. "Diego, he said this valley will be his home. He will bring more men, guns. They plan to stay." A ripple of dread passed through the room. To be raided was one horror, to be conquered entirely was another. Father Alonso bowed his head, whispering a prayer over her. The villagers shifted uneasily, glancing at one another with new fear. Ethan sat motionless, though his jaw tightened. The revelation was no surprise. Outlaws did not merely take, they consume. Yet hearing it spoken aloud confirmed what he had dreaded. This was not a passing storm. It was a siege. He rose quietly, stepping outside before the prayers resumed. The night air struck cold, the desert vast and merciless under the stars. For a long while he stood there, staring at the horizon, listening to the faint echo of the hymn still ringing in his ears. Once he had prayed in the same way. Once he had believed. But war had taught him that bullets answered prayers faster than heaven. And yet, something in the sound of that hymn refused to fade. He touched the Bible again, this time opening it just enough to glimpse the names scrawled on the first page. His wife, his son. His thumb lingered over them, tracing letters faded by time. Behind him, the chapel doors creaked. Isabella stood there, her face lit by candlelight. She said nothing, only held his gaze for a moment before returning inside. Ethan closed the Bible and slid it back into his coat. He told himself it meant nothing, but the song would not leave him. The days that followed unfolded with a strange rhythm, half dread, half fragile peace. The villagers repaired fences and patched roofs, as though normal work might banish the shadow of Vargas. Children carried buckets from the well, their laughter nervous but real, the kind that breaks through even in times of siege. Ethan found himself drawn into that rhythm despite every instinct to remain apart. One morning, Miguel trailed him to the corral. The boy's stick rifle traded for a determination that shone brighter than his years. "Teach me," Miguel demanded. Ethan frowned. "Teach you what?" "To fight, to ride like you, to shoot." The boy's voice cracked on the last word, but his eyes did not waver. Ethan tightened the saddle straps, ignoring him. A gun isn't a toy. It's not even a gift. It's a burden, one you don't want. Miguel scowled, small hands curling into fists. "But if I don't learn, how will I protect Mama?" The question struck Ethan harder than any bullet could. He saw in the boy's face the reflection of another child, his own son, once eager to follow in his father's shadow. That memory had been buried deep, yet here it was, alive again in the stubborn tilt of Miguel's chin. At length, Ethan sighed. "Come on then, we'll start with the horse." He lifted Miguel into the saddle, steadying him with calloused hands. The boy swayed, gripping the horn tightly, and Ethan walked beside the horse, giving slow, patient instructions. Balance first. Confidence before courage. A man who can't sit a saddle has no business holding a rifle. Miguel grinned, the first unguarded smile Ethan had seen since arriving. It lasted only a moment, but it lingered in Ethan's mind long after. Later that evening, Isabella came to the corral. She leaned on the fence, her face soft in the glow of the setting sun. "You shouldn't encourage him," she said, though her tone held no anger. "I didn't," Ethan replied. "I warned him." Her gaze held his, searching, measuring. "And yet you taught him." Ethan looked away, tightening the reins as if the leather might explain what he could not. Better he learns with caution than with desperation. For a time they stood in silence. The air smelled of mesquite and dust, the kind of scent that carried both memory and promise. Isabella's hands were roughened from work, yet she moved with a quiet grace. Ethan found himself noticing too much, the way her voice softened when speaking to Miguel, the way she carried sorrow without letting it consume her. He turned back to the horse, unsettled. He had vowed never to feel the weight of family again. Yet here was a woman who bore the same burdens he once knew, and a boy who stirred echoes he thought silenced forever. That night, by the fire outside the chapel, Isabella brought him a small loaf of bread, still warm from the stone oven. She set it down without a word, only a faint nod. Ethan accepted it, breaking it carefully, the taste humble but filling. For a long while, neither spoke. The fire cracked softly, and above them, stars spread across the desert sky. At last, Isabella's voice broke the stillness. "He needs someone to guide him. Someone who has seen the world." Ethan's answer was slow, reluctant. "And what if the world I've seen has nothing worth teaching?" She studied him, her expression unreadable, then looked back at the flames. "Then teach him what not to become." The words sank deep, settling in places Ethan thought long hollow. He stared into the fire until the embers blurred, his chest tight with a weight both painful and strangely welcome. The next morning, the sound of hammers echoed through the valley. At first, it was only 2 or 3 men patching a broken fence, but by midday, half the village was working as if moved by the same unseen hand. Women carried buckets of water from the well, children gathered stones, old men sharpened tools long unused. Ethan watched from the corral, silent as ever. He had expected despair, resignation, the kind of fear that rots a man from the inside. Instead, he saw resolve hardening like clay in fire. By the chapel, a group of young men practiced with rifles so old they seemed more relic than weapon. Their shots cracked unevenly, kicking up dust more often than striking target. Each misfire drew curses, but also laughter, raw, nervous, yet determined. Isabella passed by with a basket of bread, handing pieces to the men between volleys. Miguel followed at her side, puffing his chest as though already one of them. When Ethan caught his eye, the boy grinned, unashamed. Father Alonso moved among the workers, his cassock hem dusted with earth. He bent to help repair a wall, his hands as calloused as any rancher's. When one man faltered, the priest spoke words of encouragement, not lofty sermons, but plain truths. Your hands protect more than bricks, they shield your children. As the days stretched on, Ethan found himself drifting closer. He corrected the stance of a boy holding a rifle too loosely, adjusted a nail hammered crooked into a barricade, lifted a beam when 2 men struggled beneath its weight. Each time he meant only to pass by, yet somehow he stayed until the work was done. When evening came, the villagers gathered in the square, sweat-soaked but proud. The rough walls they had raised stood taller than their fear, and the well was guarded by a ring of stones. It was not much, but it was something. Ethan sat apart, sharpening his knife as if uninterested. Yet his eyes betrayed him, following every small act of courage. A girl no older than 12 filled clay jugs with water, steady despite the weight. An old widow stacked dried mesquite branches by the fire as fuel for the night watch. Even the children played at keeping guard, sticks on their shoulders like tiny sentinels. Isabella joined him at the edge of the square. She carried nothing but the dust of the day, yet she looked stronger than before. "They are not soldiers," Ethan said quietly. "No," Isabella agreed, "but they are not victims either." Her words struck him with unexpected force. He had seen too many villages broken, too many people surrender before the fight began. Here, for the first time in years, he saw the opposite. Ordinary folk standing not because they wanted to, but because they refused to kneel. As darkness fell, the villagers lit torches around the square. Their flames wavered in the desert wind, but they burned steady enough to push back the night. Miguel approached Ethan with a wooden practice rifle in hand, his chest heaving with excitement. "Did you see me shoot?" he asked breathlessly. Ethan allowed himself the faintest smile. "I saw you try, and trying's a start." The boy beamed, running back to his friends. Isabella lingered a moment longer. "You see," she said softly, "hope still lives here." Ethan did not answer, but as he looked out across the square, lit by torches and filled with voices, he felt something stir inside him, something dangerously close to belonging. It came at dawn as promised. Not the full force of Vargas's gang, but a single rider bearing his colors, a rag tied to the rifle stock, black as midnight. The man rode into the square, tossed a bundle onto the dust, and galloped away without a word. The bundle unraveled in the dirt, spilling out broken arrows and a strip of cloth smeared with blood. A message clear enough: "We come with fire. At sunrise tomorrow, this valley is ours." Fear rippled through the crowd. Mothers clutched their children closer. Men gripped their rifles with hands that trembled despite themselves. The barricades suddenly looked small, the torches feeble, their preparations like paper walls against a storm. Ethan stood apart, staring at the blood-stained cloth. He had seen this ritual before, in villages across the south where soldiers marked their prey. It was not merely a threat. It was a covenant of violence, one Vargas fully intended to keep. That night, the village buzzed with argument. Some wanted to flee into the hills. Others swore they would stand and fight. Voices rose, hands slammed against tables, tears ran freely. Ethan slipped away from the noise, saddling his horse in silence. The saddle leather creaked like a guilty whisper. His fingers fumbled with the straps as though they resisted him. Miguel appeared at the stable door, eyes wide. "You're leaving?" Ethan didn't answer. The boy's voice cracked. "You said I had to learn to be brave. Was that a lie?" The words pierced deeper than Ethan cared to admit. He turned his back, tightening the last strap, unable to face the boy's stare. Later, in the stillness of the chapel, Ethan knelt in the shadows. The Bible rested open before him, the candlelight trembling over names written in faded ink. His wife, his son. His hand hovered above the page, shaking. "I can't," he whispered, though no one was there to hear. "I can't bury more ghosts." A hand settled gently on his shoulder. Father Alonso stood beside him. The years etched deep into his face, but his eyes shone steady as flame. "You think walking away will spare you?" the priest asked softly. "It won't. The weight will follow. It always does." Ethan bowed his head, unable to speak. The priest knelt beside him. To defend life is not war. It is not hatred. It is to honor the work of God. These people are His children, and so were yours. The words cut like a blade, but they did not wound. They pierced the fog Ethan had lived in for years. He felt tears well unbidden, blurring the page. For the first time since the war, he let them fall. From outside, a bell tolled. The villagers were gathering again, clinging to what little hope they had. Ethan rose slowly, closing the Bible, sliding it back into his coat. His hand lingered on it, steady now. At the chapel door, Isabella waited. In her hands she held a rosary, its beads worn smooth by generations. She pressed it into his palm without a word. Their eyes met, no plea spoken, no promise made. Yet in that silence something passed between them. Trust, fragile but unbreakable. Ethan closed his fist around the rosary. His voice was low, but this time it carried certainty. Tell them I'll be there at sunrise.
If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey.
The night before battle fell heavy on the valley. Torches flickered against the barricades, their smoke curling into a sky clouded with stars. Men carried rifles that shook in their hands. Women tied bandages from torn sheets. Children were hushed into corners, their wide eyes mirroring every fear unspoken. Inside the chapel, the air trembled with prayer. Father Alonso led them, voice steady despite the tremor in his bones. Señor, protégenos. The words rolled like a tide, answered by dozens of voices, some cracked with age, some thick with tears. A hymn rose, faint but fierce, clinging to the rafters as though heaven itself bent low to listen. Ethan stood at the doorway, hat pressed to his chest, watching. He had fought battles before, but none where the weapons of choice were faith and courage. For a moment he considered turning away, letting their prayers cover him like borrowed armor. But that would not do, not this time. He stepped into the shadows at the back pew, his Bible in hand. He opened it not to a passage, but to the names scrawled in faded ink, his wife, his son. His lips moved, no sound escaping. It was not a polished prayer, only a broken plea. Let me stand, just once, not for myself, but for them. When he rose, he carried more than a rifle slung across his back. The Bible lay tucked inside his coat, close to his heart, as though the two weights together balanced him for what was to come. By dawn, the village was awake, every soul gathered in the square. The barricades loomed rough and uneven, yet they stood like sentinels. Men checked their guns again and again, though their hands betrayed their nerves. Isabella moved among them with quiet strength, offering bread and water, each gesture more steadying than bullets. Miguel clung to her side, glancing often toward Ethan. At the sound of the chapel bell, Father Alonso stepped forward, raising a wooden cross. His words carried clear. Today we do not fight for land, but for life. We stand because to yield is to deny the gift God has given us. We stand together. A murmur of assent rose, fragile but real. Then Ethan walked to the front, his boots striking the dust. He set his rifle down on the makeshift barricade, and then, slowly, placed his Bible beside it. 2 weapons, 2 burdens, side by side. The villagers fell silent. Miguel's eyes widened. Isabella's breath caught. Father Alonso bowed his head. There would be no turning back. The sun had barely risen when the first shots cracked across the valley. Dust kicked up near the barricades, and a horse screamed as riders surged from the east. Vargas's men came like a storm, faces masked, rifles glinting, whooping to rattle nerves before their bullets could. The villagers froze. For a heartbeat, the square went silent except for pounding hooves. Then chaos erupted. Men scrambled to the barricades, firing wildly. Women pulled children into cellars. Someone screamed a name already lost to the din. Ethan was already moving. He grabbed a boy by the collar, shoving him behind cover. "Aim low, steady your breath," he barked at another man fumbling with his rifle. He scanned the field, gauging the rider's angle, the weak spots in the defenses. Years of soldiering came back, not as nightmares now, but as tools. Smoke filled the air as powder burned. A rider toppled from his saddle, crashing into dust. Yet another leapt the first barricade, swinging a machete. Ethan fired once, the sound cracking sharper than the others, and the man crumpled before he could strike. The villagers, seeing him, steadied. They copied his movements, firing in rhythm rather than panic. Shots rang truer, barricades held firm under the first wave. Still, fear clawed at them. Ethan could see it in their eyes. "Hold your ground," he shouted, his voice cutting through the roar. "This is your home. Don't give them an inch." Beside him, Miguel crouched with a stick rifle, mimicking every motion Ethan made. Isabella pulled him back, her face pale but resolute. "Stay down," she hissed, though her gaze flicked toward Ethan with something unspoken, a plea, or perhaps a trust she had not given anyone in years. Arrows whistled overhead, thudding into wood. One struck the chapel door, quivering there like a threat aimed at God himself. Father Alonso did not flinch. He stood in the doorway, cross raised high, his lips moving in prayer as bullets split the air. The riders circled, firing from a distance now, testing the villagers' will. Bodies lay in the dust, some theirs, some not. The square reeked of gunpowder and fear, yet the line held. For the first time, Ethan realized they were not breaking. These people, untrained and terrified, had refused to scatter. They were fighting back, and because of that, so was he. The first wave broke, leaving dust and silence in its wake. A few bodies lay still beyond the barricades, horses wheeling nervously as their riders pulled back to regroup. The villagers held their breath, rifles clutched tight, eyes darting toward Ethan as though he alone could decide what came next. Then Vargas rode forward. His horse was black as coal, eyes wild with foam, and upon its back sat the man who had cast terror over half the valley. A scar cut across his cheek, his smile twisting cruelly beneath it. He reined in just beyond rifle shot, lifting his hat in mock salute. "Well now," he called, his voice carrying over the square. "Didn't think your rabbits had teeth. But teeth or no, you'll still end up skinned." The villagers muttered, some in anger, some in fear. Ethan stepped forward, calm though his heart pounded. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and walked past the barricade until he stood clear, a lone figure between two armies. "Diego Vargas," Ethan's voice rang steady. "You've seen enough blood. Turn your men around. Leave this place, and no more lives need be lost." The gang laughed behind their leader, the sound like crows on a carcass. Vargas leaned forward in his saddle, sneering. "And what are you now, preacher? You think your Bible will scare me? You think your God will stop my bullets?" He spat into the dust. "Faith is for the weak, and mercy." He raised his rifle slowly, leveling it toward Ethan. "Mercy gets you killed." From the barricade, Miguel cried out, "Don't listen to him!" His voice cracked, half boy, half man, and the sound pierced the air sharper than any shot. Ethan did not flinch. He met Vargas's gaze, eyes steady. "Mercy doesn't make a man weak. It makes him stronger than you'll ever be." For a moment, silence reigned. The villagers waited, hearts hammering. Ethan stood tall, unarmed in spirit, though armed in body, offering his enemy a choice he never would have given in the past. Vargas's answer came with a bark of laughter, cold and merciless. "Then watch how strong I am." He kicked his horse, charging forward, his gang surging behind him. The battle was not over. It had only just begun. Vargas's charge hit the barricade like thunder against brittle wood. Horses reared, hooves striking sparks. Rifles spat fire into the square. The villagers braced, but the line buckled under the force. Screams tore through the dust as men and women scrambled to hold the walls. Ethan was in the thick of it, rifle in hand, shouting orders through the chaos. He dropped one rider with a clean shot, then swung the butt of his gun into another who vaulted the barricade. Blood sprayed across the boards. The weight of violence pressed on him like an old, familiar curse. "Hold!" he roared, though his voice was nearly drowned by the clash of steel and gunpowder. Arrows streaked overhead. One grazed Ethan's arm, spinning him half around. Pain flared, hot and sharp. Before he could recover, a rider lunged, blade flashing. Ethan barely blocked with his rifle, the steel ringing inches from his throat. He staggered, strength failing. For a heartbeat, he saw death rushing toward him. And then it didn't come. A villager, an old farmer whose back was bent with years, struck the rider with a pitchfork, knocking him from the saddle. Others followed, swinging hammers, axes, whatever tools their hands had known in quieter days. They did not fight well, but they fought together, dragging Ethan back to his feet. At the barricade, Miguel's eyes were wide with terror. He gripped his wooden rifle like it was iron, watching Ethan bleed, watching men fall on both sides. The boy's chest heaved, torn between the thrill of courage and the horror of what courage cost. Isabella pulled him close, forcing his gaze down. "Look only when you are ready," she whispered fiercely. "This is not a game, Miguel, never a game." The villagers, fueled by desperation, surged as one. Together with Ethan, they forced the riders back a step, then another. Smoke choked the air, bodies littered the square, but the line did not break. Ethan, breathing hard, leaned on his rifle. His arm throbbed, his lungs burned, but when his eyes met those of the villagers, he saw not fear, but fire. They were no longer waiting for a savior. They were fighting as if each soul mattered, each life worth the risk. For the first time since war had broken him, Ethan felt it again. Not loneliness, not guilt, but something far more dangerous. Hope. The square had become a ruin of smoke and broken wood. Bodies lay scattered, villagers and raiders alike, while the last echoes of gunfire faded into silence. Only two men still moved with purpose. Vargas dismounted, his black horse bolting into the hills. Dust clung to his coat, his scarred face twisted in rage. He carried a long knife in one hand, a revolver in the other, his steps deliberate as he stalked toward the heart of the square. Ethan stepped forward to meet him. His arm bled freely, his breath came ragged, but his eyes were steady. Around them, the villagers drew back, forming a ragged circle. No one spoke. It was as though the world itself held its breath. Vargas grinned, teeth flashing. "You should 'a' kept runnin', drifter. You think these people will remember your name when you're buried in their dirt?" Ethan said nothing. He dropped his empty rifle, letting it fall to the dust. His hand went instead to the pistol at his hip, but he didn't draw, not yet. "You had your chance," Ethan said quietly. "I offered you mercy." "Mercy is for the weak," Vargas spat, raising his revolver. Ethan's hand moved fast, steel clearing leather in a single motion. 2 shots cracked almost as one. The villagers flinched. Smoke drifted between them. Vargas staggered, a red bloom spreading across his chest. But he didn't fall. He snarled, stumbling forward with the knife raised high. Ethan braced himself, too slow to reload, his strength fading. Then he did what the war had never let him do. He held his ground. The knife slashed, grazing Ethan's coat. Ethan caught Vargas's wrist, twisting, forcing the blade aside. They grappled in the dirt, grunts and curses breaking the silence. Vargas's rage was raw, feral. Ethan's resolve was carved from grief and prayer. With a final surge, Ethan wrenched the knife free and cast it aside. Vargas fell to his knees, clutching the wound that was already stealing his breath. His eyes glared upward, defiant even as darkness closed in. "You think God will welcome a killer like you," he hissed. Ethan's voice was low, steady. "I think he'll welcome anyone who asks, even you." Vargas laughed once, a sound half cough, half mockery. He collapsed into the dust, his body finally still. The villagers remained silent, staring at the man who had haunted them, now nothing more than flesh and shadow. Ethan stood over him, revolver hanging loose at his side, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. He whispered a single verse, almost too soft to hear. "Blessed are the merciful." And then he lowered his head, not in triumph, but in weary reverence. Silence fell heavier than the gunfire that had preceded it. The echoes of the last shot clung to the mountains, then drifted away, leaving only the crackle of burning wood and the ragged breaths of survivors. The villagers slowly stepped from behind barricades, weapons still clenched, though no enemy remained. Faces streaked with ash and tears scanned the square, searching for kin, fearing what they might find. A mother collapsed to her knees beside her husband's body. An elder whispered a prayer over a fallen grandson. Grief mingled with relief in every corner, 2 threads woven so tightly they could not be pulled apart. Father Alonso moved through the wreckage, his hand raised in blessing. He paused at each body, raider and villager alike, tracing the sign of the cross over the still forms. "Señor, receive them," he murmured. His voice was steady, though his eyes burned with sorrow. Ethan stood apart for a moment, shoulders sagging, pistol hanging loose at his side. The weight of the battle pressed down on him, heavier even than war had ever been. He had not fought for orders or for a flag. He had fought for faces he now saw bloodied, broken, alive, and gone. Miguel emerged from the crowd, his small hands trembling as he reached for Ethan's sleeve. "Is it over?" he whispered. Ethan looked down at him, at the boy's wide eyes searching for an answer he could not truly give. He placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder, steadying him. "For tonight," Ethan said softly, "for tonight it's over." Isabella approached then, her dress torn, her face streaked with smoke and dust. She carried water in a cracked clay jar, pressing it into Ethan's hands without a word. Their eyes met, hers filled with gratitude and sorrow, his with the quiet knowledge that no victory came without cost. At the edge of the square, the chapel bell swung broken on its rope, but someone struck it anyway. The hollow tone rolled over the valley, not as a call to arms, but as a call to remember. Ethan sank onto the steps of the chapel, chest heaving, his strength nearly gone. He pulled the Bible from inside his coat, its leather cover smudged with ash and blood. Holding it close, he closed his eyes, whispering words he barely remembered but somehow needed more than ever. "Lord, let them heal, and if I must carry more, let me carry it for them." The villagers gathered in a circle, some kneeling, some standing, their voices rising in prayer. In the center, Ethan sat in silence, the Bible against his heart, a lone figure who had found, if not peace, then at least a reason to keep walking. The battle was done, but his journey was not. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. The night had passed, but its weight lingered in every breath. Dawn crept slowly across the valley, touching the broken barricades, the blackened beams, the bodies covered in blankets. The air smelled of smoke, iron, and earth freshly torn by hooves and blood. Yet, within the ruin, life stirred. The village had endured. Men and women moved quietly, carrying water, tending wounds, whispering names of the lost. A small group gathered near the chapel, where Father Alonso lit a stub of candle and lifted his hands. His voice, hoarse yet firm, carried words of thanksgiving. "Señor, we are not worthy, yet you spared us. Receive the fallen into your light. Strengthen those who remain." One by one, voices joined his. A hymn rose, not strong at first, but trembling, wounded, and beautiful. The melody was old, a Spanish song passed down through generations. Its notes drifted over the square, wrapping around the survivors like a blanket. For the older villagers, it awakened memories of their parents singing in times of hunger and war. For the younger, it was a promise that their faith would not be silenced, not even by death. Ethan stood apart, near the chapel steps. His clothes were torn, his arms still bound in bloodied cloth, his face pale with exhaustion. He had fought as though the world demanded it, and now the world asked him to stand still and receive gratitude he did not believe he deserved. Children peered at him from behind skirts and shawls. Some were bold enough to step closer, eyes wide with awe. A boy pressed a flower into his hand, though Ethan did not know what to do with it. He tucked it carefully into his coat, saying nothing. Then Isabella approached. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hair still matted from smoke and dust, but her eyes held clarity. In her hands she carried something small, her mother's rosary, its beads worn smooth by decades of prayer. She hesitated, then pressed it into Ethan's rough palm. "You carried the rifle," she said softly, "but you also carried us. This belongs with you now." Ethan stared at the beads, their simple wooden surface darkened with age. He shook his head. "This isn't mine." "It is," Isabella insisted, her voice firm though her hands trembled. "Because you fought not only with bullets, but with mercy. That is the strength of God's hand, not yours alone." For the first time in many years, Ethan felt his throat tighten. He closed his fist around the rosary and nodded once, unable to find words. From the crowd, Miguel burst through, his face streaked with soot, his eyes red from smoke and tears. He clung to Ethan's side, wrapping thin arms around his waist. "Don't leave," the boy whispered, his voice breaking. "You can't leave us now." Ethan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, steady and firm, though his heart wavered. He looked out over the people gathered, their faces marked by sorrow, gratitude, and hope. He saw in them something he had lost long ago, the courage to keep living together, even after the storm. The hymn swelled, voices strong now, rising toward the heavens. Father Alonso led them, his voice unshaken, as the sun broke fully over the hills. Golden light bathed the square, and for a fleeting moment the scars of battle seemed less harsh, softened by the glow of mourning and prayer. Ethan stood in silence, the rosary warm in his hand, Miguel's arms around him, the hymn filling the air. He had not asked for this place, this fight, this belonging, but it had found him nonetheless. And though he knew the dawn meant a choice ahead,
For now he let the song carry him, reminding him that even broken men could still be part of a prayer. The morning stretched long and golden over the valley. Smoke still clung to the ruins, but the air was lighter now, the weight of fear giving way to something steadier. Villagers busied themselves with clearing the square, carrying wood to rebuild, and burying the fallen with quiet reverence. Though grief lay heavy, their voices carried purpose.
Life was already beginning again. Ethan saddled his horse in silence at the edge of town. The animal stamped its hooves, restless, eager to be gone from the scent of blood and fire. Ethan's movements were slow, deliberate, each tug of the strap heavy with the knowledge of what it meant. He was leaving. Miguel found him first. The boy's eyes were swollen from weeping, his small hands clutching the hem of Ethan's coat. "You can't," Miguel said, voice trembling. "You can't ride away now. We need you. I need you." Ethan crouched down, his joints stiff from battle, his heart even stiffer from what he must say. He placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. "Miguel, I was never meant to stay. Men like me, we bring trouble with us. This place, these people, they need peace, and peace doesn't follow me." Tears rolled down Miguel's cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the dust on his face. "But you're not trouble. You saved us." Ethan's voice softened. "I fought because I had to. But you're the reason this place will last. You and the others will carry it forward, not me." From behind, Isabella watched, her hands folded tight around her skirt. She did not speak, but her eyes carried both sorrow and understanding. When Ethan rose to his feet, she stepped forward. "Then at least let me thank you once more," she said, "for giving us another dawn." Ethan tipped his hat slightly, a gesture more reverent than casual. He had no words strong enough, so he offered the only thing he could: silence filled with respect. Father Alonso came last, the old priest leaning on his cane. "You came as a stranger," he said, voice grave but kind. "But you leave as part of our story. God writes in ways we do not see, and perhaps one day you will understand what this meant, for us and for you." Ethan looked down at the rosary, hanging now around his wrist, its beads catching the morning light. He touched it briefly, then nodded. "Maybe, Father, maybe." He mounted his horse, the leather creaking beneath his weight. Miguel ran a few steps after him, but Ethan turned in the saddle, holding up a hand. "Take care of them," he said firmly. "You are braver than you know." The boy froze, shoulders squared, as though trying to grow into the charge given him. He nodded, though tears still shone in his eyes. Ethan tugged the reins, and the horse moved forward. Hooves struck the ground with steady rhythm, carrying him past the chapel, past the broken barricades, past the villagers who stood silently watching. Some crossed themselves, others simply bowed their heads. At the crest of the hill, the sun broke fully over the land. Its light spilled across Ethan's figure, turning him into a dark silhouette against the brilliance of dawn. In one hand he held the reins, in the other, pressed close to his chest, his Bible. He did not look back. Behind him, the village stirred with new life. Hammering began on fallen beams. Voices rose in song, and hope, fragile but real, took root in the ashes. Ahead of him lay the open horizon, wide and unknown. The drifter who once carried only sorrow now carried something more: faith, however fragile, and a promise not yet complete. And so he rode into the dawn, not as a man escaping, but as a man still searching. His shadow stretched long behind him, merging with the valley, becoming part of the story the villagers would tell for generations, of the stranger who came, fought, prayed, and vanished into the light. Stories like Ethan's are more than tales of gunfire and dusty trails. They are reminders of the courage, faith, and compassion that built communities across the frontier. Many of you who lived through hardship, who remember neighbors standing together through storms, wars, or loss, will feel echoes of your own journey here. This is not just a battle in a forgotten valley. It is a mirror of the resilience and mercy that endure in every generation. As we look back, we honor not only the legends of the West, but also the quiet heroes in our own families, the ones who carried burdens, chose kindness, and kept faith alive. If these memories stir your heart, stay with us as we share more true Wild West stories, tales of struggle, redemption, and hope that remind us who we are and what we can still become. Subscribe and let the journey continue.